All right, y'all, welcome back. I hope everyone's week was better than mine. I am personally disappointed that I have to miss class again, but we are all still quite sick with this flu, so I don't want to spread it. So again, we're doing this via YouTube. All right, well, last lesson we talked about action. We said that action is the bridge between your beautiful goal map and actual results. But I've been thinking about something since last week, and I want to start today with a question. Why do two people with the exact same goal get completely different results? I'm serious. Think about it for a minute. Say two students in the same class, same teacher, same textbook, same homework. One gets an A, the other one barely scrapes by. Two people join the gym at the same time with the same goal. One is still going 6 months later, and the other quit before month 2. Two friends both say they want to start a business. One builds something real, and the other talks about it for years, but never really starts. What's the difference? There are a lot of real factors: work ethic, motivation, support, a support system, and natural talent. I won't discount any of them. But here's what I've seen over and over in my coaching career and in my own life. Identity leads to actions, leads to results. Regardless of one's plans, the difference almost always comes down to the identity, specifically how each person sees themselves. Their personal view of their identity determines just how much action they put forth to reach their goals. One person sees themselves as someone who studies hard, so they study hard. The other person deep down believes that they're not a school person. So every time they sit down to study, something in them fights it because it doesn't match who they believe that they are. One person sees themselves as an athlete, so getting up to go to the gym feels natural. It's just what athletes do. The other person sees themselves as someone who's trying to get fit. And trying feels very different from being. This is what we're diving into today. And I want to be upfront with you. This is one of those lessons that is probably going to be one of the most personally challenging lessons we've done all year. Not because the concepts are complicated, they're really not, but because it requires you to be really honest with yourself, dig deep, and get introspective, much like the very beginning of class. Sound good? Okay, let's get into it. Here's something I think will feel familiar to at least a few of you, if not every single person in this room. You know what you're supposed to do. You know you should read your Bible, right? You know you should work on your goals. You know you should go to bed earlier or eat better or spend less time scrolling your phone. You know, but knowing doesn't automatically translate into doing. Because if it did, everyone would be in great shape, financially stable, spiritually thriving, and knocking their goals out of the park all the time. Because most people know what they should be doing. So why the gap between knowing and doing? It's one of those things that sounds simple, but the more you sit with it, the more you realize that it explains almost everything. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. Your behavior is not primarily driven by your goals. It's not primarily driven by your motivation. It's actually driven mostly by your identity, your deep down sense of who you are. Say your friends are all getting fast food and you're trying to eat better. If you say, ugh, I really shouldn't, I'm trying to eat healthy, you're already halfway to ordering the extra cheesy fries. Because trying signals that your identity hasn't caught up yet. You still see yourself as somebody who eats junk, who's just currently attempting not to. But if you say, I'm good, I eat healthy now, or that's not really how I eat anymore, that comes from a completely different place. That is someone whose identity is already shifted to a healthy eater. Here's why this matters for everything we've been building this year. You can have the most well-designed goal map in the world. You can know your SMART goals inside and out, step by step. And you can have your why written out beautifully in your journal. But if your identity doesn't match your goals, your brain will find a way to sabotage you. Not on purpose, necessarily, not out of laziness, but because your brain is constantly trying to stay consistent with who it believes you are. So today, we're going to look at three things: your self-image, your self-ideal, and your self-esteem. And by the end of class, you're going to be able to see your own identity gap, literally on paper, and understand exactly what to do about it. The first thing we're going to talk about is self-image. Self-image, who I believe I am right now. Your self-image is your internal picture of yourself. It's not necessarily who you actually are, but it's who you believe you are. It's how you see yourself. Your self-image is not always accurate. It's built over time from your experiences, your failures, your wins, things that people have said about you or to you, things you've told yourself, patterns you've noticed and started to believe were permanent. This is the part of your identity that will hold all of your limiting beliefs that we've talked about so much. And also everything good that you've come to believe about yourself too. For some of you, your self-image might include things like, I'm not a disciplined person. I'm good at math. I'm kind of shy. I'm creative but disorganized. I'm responsible. I'm someone who follows through. I'm lazy about the hard stuff. Whether those feel positive or negative, all of those statements are self-image. They're labels that you've pinned on yourself. And whether you realize it or not, they're shaping almost every decision you make every day. And it's worth noting that the self-image can actually go both ways. Some people have a self-image that's too low. They think less of themselves than is actually true. I think this is the most common way. But some people actually have a self-image that's inflated, at least in some areas. They may see themselves as already excellent in an area where they actually have a lot of room to grow. Both create a gap, just in different directions. Next is your self-ideal, who I want to become. Your self-ideal is the version of your best self, the person that you're striving to become. Things like, I want to be deeply disciplined, or I want to be so confident. I want to be someone with a strong faith. I want to be a person of integrity. I want to be physically strong and healthy. Now, there's something you may want to ask yourself, which is your self-ideal actually yours? Because a lot of people, especially at your age, and I mean that with zero judgment, have a self-ideal that was handed to them. I mean, technically it's fine because that's how a self-ideal is originally built. Our parents hand us what we think we should be. But at a certain point in time, you have to decide for yourself, does this align with what I truly feel that I'm supposed to be? And ideally, you align that with God. So these self-ideals can be handed to you by a parent, a coach, social media, or even a friend group. They're chasing a version of themselves, this person that's been handed a self-ideal, that someone else decided was the right version. So if you think about our lesson on intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, just like in that motivation, a self-ideal that is built on external expectations is fragile. It collapses under pressure. And when that collapse happens, people are left not even knowing who they are, let alone who they're supposed to be. But a self-ideal that's genuinely yours, built that in a way that reflects your relationship with Christ, your values, your purpose, that one can carry you through the hard stuff. So, as we do today's activity, I want you to make sure the self-ideal that you're rating later on is actually the person you want to become, not just who your parents have told you that you are. Not just who your parents have told you that you are. not who your friends think would be impressive, but who do you, standing before God, want to grow into? All right, now the third term we're learning about today is self-esteem. That's how I feel about myself. All right? I want to challenge something that you might think you already know about this one. Most people think that self-esteem, either good or bad, is built through compliments or insults, through affirmations or poor self-talk, through other people telling you you're great or not, or maybe through just deciding to feel good about yourself. And while those things can all help, we've talked about the power of words and affirmations back in lesson 8, and I stand by all of that. But affirmations alone don't build lasting, true self-esteem. This is what actually does. Self-esteem is the distance between your self-image and your self-ideal. Your self-esteem, how you genuinely feel about yourself, underneath all the performance and the social media and the good days, is directly related to how big that gap is between who you believe you are and who you want to become. When that gap is small, you feel confident and capable, like you're living as the person you should be. But when that gap is large, you feel frustrated, restless, like you're falling short, like you're not enough. Like, not because you're bad, but because you can feel that distance between where you are and where you wish you were. And here's the good news and the hard truth wrapped up in one. You can't close that gap by just feeling better about yourself. You feel better about yourself by closing that gap. And you close it by actually becoming more like your ideal self, action by action, day by day. So let me make this even more concrete before we do today's activity. Think about someone you know. It could be you. It doesn't have to be you. It could be anyone. Someone who says that they want to be healthy, but they keep skipping workouts and eating too much junk. Now, you know they feel guilty about it every time they skip a workout or eat too much junk or realize that they're doing it. But why? Why do they feel guilty about it? Chances are it's not because they're going to get in trouble or be somehow reprimanded for it, but it's because there's a gap. Their self-ideal says, I'm a healthy person, but their self-image says, I'm someone who can't stay consistent with my diet and exercise. And that gap is what creates the guilt, shame, frustration, that feeling of, why can't I just do the thing? And I know I use health as my examples a lot of the time. I want to note, this is just because in the very beginning of my coaching career, I started like 12 years ago, 13 years ago, somewhere around there. I was actually a health and fitness coach first. So that's where all of my examples always come from. Sorry. All right, so now think about the opposite. Someone who's been training consistently for a year. I bet they don't feel guilty about skipping a workout because they almost never do. So if they do, they don't have to feel guilty about it because they know that's not who they are. It was just a circumstance that required it, and it won't change anything long term. Their self-image and self-ideal are so close together in that area. Therefore, their self-esteem around fitness is high, not because someone told them that they were really fit, but because their actions match their identity. And yes, I said their self-esteem around fitness, because you actually have differing levels of self-esteem in differing areas. You don't just have low self-esteem or high self-esteem. It depends on what area of life or traits or different personality areas that you're talking about. So the question isn't, how do I feel better about myself? It's, how do I close the gap? That's the real question. And the answer is self-discipline, which, if you remember lesson 10, isn't about restriction, it's about direction. It's about consistently choosing the actions of your ideal self, even when it's uncomfortable. until those actions start to feel like just who you are. Every time you act more like your ideal self, even in a small way, you cast a vote for that identity. And every vote stacks up. Enough votes, and the identity shifts. Your self-image starts to catch up to your self-ideal. That gap narrows, and your self-esteem rises. Not because someone gave it to you, but because you earned it through alignment. All right, here's where we make this visible, because I don't just want you to understand the concept, I want you to actually see it on paper in your own life right now. Your wonderful stand-in teacher today is going to pass out a worksheet while I take a moment to talk about it. Go ahead. On this worksheet, you will see that there are 8 traits we are going to talk about. Kindness, discipline, confidence, patience, responsibility, focus, honesty, integrity, and faith. All right, now, like I said, there is a different threshold of self-esteem in just about every trait and area of your personality that you can think of. But we are going to be working with just these 8 traits today, because trying to measure everything would be impossible. It would definitely take more than an hour. Here's how this works. For each trait, you're going to give yourself 2 ratings, okay? 1 for your self-image. That's how you honestly see yourself right now. Today, in this season. Not where you used to be, not your best day ever, but today. Be honest. This sheet is only for you. You don't have to turn it in, and no one else is going to see it unless you choose to let them. All right? So you're rating your self-image first. You're going to color your rating with blue or use a circle to circle your vote for your self-image. Remember, self-image is how you see yourself right now. A 1 means you genuinely struggle here and you know it. This is not a good rating. As you can see on the page, I have it listed as not very kind on the kindness rating for 1. And a 10 means it's a real strength, something that consistently shows up in your life without much effort. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, and that's completely normal. Okay, the second rating is your self-ideal. That's where you want to be, where you're aiming. And remember what we talked about. Make sure this is your ideal, not what sounds impressive, but what you actually care about becoming. You may automatically think that all your ratings for self-ideal should be a 10, but I caution you to use your 10s wisely. Aiming for perfection might feel noble, but it also widens the gap. The only areas I have marked as 10 personally for mine are my integrity and my faith. Teacher, you can go ahead and pause this video until everyone is done with their paper. They can have up to 4 minutes. All right, hopefully everyone is done and the 4 minutes is up. Go ahead and look at your sheet. The gap between those 2 numbers, that is what we're looking at. That is your self-esteem data right there on paper. Find your biggest gap, the trait where your self-ideal and your self-image are the furthest apart. For me, that is definitely my focus. I rated my self-image as a 3 and my self-ideal as a 7 because I feel like if I could get a 7 on focus, I would be wonderful. But as you can see with my 3, I'm far off from that. And one of the most common things that I'm beating myself up about, not being able to stay focused. So you're looking at your sheet and you're finding your biggest gap. Your gap is not a flaw, okay? It's information. That gap is telling you exactly where your growth edge is right now, within these 8 traits, of course. It's telling you where the discomfort you feel the most often in life is probably coming from within these 8 traits. And it's telling you what to focus on. Now, I also want you to notice something else. Look at the traits where your gap is the smallest or even non existent, where your self image and self ideal are close together. How do you feel about yourself in those areas? Probably pretty good, right? For me, my confidence is a 7 for both. Again, I didn't rate that too high on self ideal because I don't feel like I need too much confidence, but I definitely feel like I have enough. My patience, 9 in both. I've worked long and hard to gain that. I didn't used to be a very patient person. And then my integrity is a 9 and a 10. My integrity means a lot to me. So, that lack of a gap, that feeling of pretty good, that is self esteem doing its thing. Not because someone told you you were great at those things, but because you've been living in alignment, or at least close to alignment, with your ideal self in those areas. And that feeling, that's what we're working toward across the board. Okay, so here's where a lot of people get stuck. They see the gap and they think, great, so I just have to become more disciplined before I can act disciplined. But I can't become disciplined without acting disciplined. So how does this work? Good news. The answer is simpler than it sounds. You don't wait until you are your ideal self to start acting like them. Like I mentioned earlier, you start acting like them, even imperfectly, because you're not them, even small, and that's what builds that identity into becoming them. Think about it like this. When you were first learning to drive, if you've learned to drive, you weren't a driver yet, right? But you sat in that driver's seat and you drove. And after enough times of doing that, your brain stopped thinking of driving as something you were trying to do and started thinking of it as just something you do, part of who you are. For you who don't drive yet, think of learning an instrument, sport, or any skill that you've learned. You didn't know that skill when you first started, but you did it anyway. Sloppy, messy, unsteady, and slowly, it became part of your identity. Same thing here. If your self ideal includes the trait disciplined at a 9, like mine, right now, and your self image says not very disciplined or somewhat disciplined at a 5, like me, you close that gap by doing one disciplined thing every single day. Not 100 things, one thing. You make your bed. You do the workout, even though you don't feel like it. You open your Bible, even if it's just for 5 minutes. You do your homework before you scroll. And I know I threw myself under the bus with the disciplined thing, but I'm going to also make myself feel better by letting you guys know if I had rated my self discipline 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, probably would have rated it a 2 at best. Yeah. So I'm closing the gap little by little. I am closing the gap. Each action you take to close the gap is a vote. James Clear, who I mentioned last week, calls this casting votes for your identity. Every time you act like your ideal self, you are telling your brain that this is who I am, and your brain starts to believe it. You're not faking it, you're not pretending, you are practicing. There's a difference. And here's where it loops back beautifully to last week's B- mentality, which I hope you all took to heart. You don't have to do it perfectly. A B- version of that disciplined action still counts. It still casts the vote. A 5-minute workout still casts a vote for I'm someone who works out. A 2-minute prayer still casts a vote for I'm someone who talks to God daily. The vote counts even when it's small or messy. Now, our verse of the day today is Proverbs 23:7. And it says, "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he." This verse is thousands of years old. Literally, thousands. And it describes exactly what we've been talking about today and in much of this class. What you believe about yourself in your heart, not just in your head, that becomes your reality because it shapes every single decision you make every single day. Now, here's where the Christian worldview gives us something that no self-help book could ever fully offer. When we talk about self-image and self-ideal, there's a temptation to make it entirely self-generated. Like, I decide who I am, I decide who I want to be, and I close the gap through sheer effort. And effort matters. We've established that. And we've established that you don't want to be using someone else's idea of your self-ideal. But if your entire identity is self-constructed, it's also fragile because we are human. It can crumble the moment that you fail badly enough. But remember what God says about you, about your identity. He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says he has plans to prosper you. He says that nothing can separate you from his love. He says that you are his workmanship, his masterpiece, created for good works. That's not a self-image that you can construct. That's one that he designed. So the foundation of your self-esteem isn't just the gap that you close through discipline. It's also the unchanging truth of who God says you are, underneath all of it. God doesn't see you through the gap. He sees you through what Christ has already accomplished. And that foundation holds even on the days where your actions don't match your ideal. That means that the gap, while it does still matter, it does, and you should work on it daily to close it. But it means that you close that gap from a place of security, not a place of shame. You grow because you're loved, not in order to be loved. Remember that Romans 12:2 tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That is the process that we're describing. You renew your mind. You shift your image, your self-image, toward your God-given self-ideal. And transformation follows, not the other way around. All right, here's your homework for this week. And I want you to notice that it's very simple on purpose, because simple, done consistently, is worth more than complex, only done once. Number 1, pick the one trait with the biggest gap from your identity scale. And think to yourself, what is one thing I could do daily that could help me start to close this gap? Just one thing. One small daily action that your ideal self in that area would take. Something you can realistically do every day, even on your busiest day. Remember the MVA we talked about before. Now write it in your journal, commit to yourself to do that one thing daily this week, and add it to your planner. Okay? Number 2, continue using your planner. This identity work only sticks when it connects to your actual daily life. Your planner is where intention meets reality. Number 3, keep taking action on your established goals. Your next actions are waiting. Don't let them wait too long. All right, now you know the true meaning of self-esteem and the power you hold over it. Now you know how to close the gap that causes low self-esteem and build yourself up with God, one vote at a time, one B- action at a time, one day at a time. So keep going, because you guys are so worth it.